Welcome to the Beyond Body podcast with your hosts, Mia and Holly. Join us for a sometimes fortnightly podcast
where we explore all things mental health, being a messy human, and how to get the most out of this one precious life.
and all the ridiculous stories in between. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. We are so excited to be with you for another week. So lovely to see you again, Hol.
Thanks for having me back. I feel like it's been about a year now and you just seem to keep inviting me back.
Thanks for having me to my own podcast. It's always a privilege and a pleasure. I'm so glad you keep doing it. So today we are doing something that we've done before, which is sort of like a little bit of crowdsourcing. We wanted to talk today about broken promises from our eating disorders, and not just ours, but yours as well. So I jumped onto Instagram yesterday to collect some of the things that your eating disorders might have promised you, or some of the things that you'd hoped it might have delivered on that it failed to, because we certainly have a list of these of our own. And it's one of the biggest responses we've ever had. So I don't think this is going to be a one and done kind of podcast topic, because I think this is a really powerful way to demonstrate that what you get going in and what you actually get in and coming out are two totally different worlds. And that can really help people from a bird's eye view look at it and go, what am I doing? Do I want to continue on this path? And kind of gives people a choice back in a sense. What do you think it is about this topic, Hol, that like resonates so much?
So it gives people a choice back, but before the choice, there's some hard truths. So I think this is one of those topics that I feel like people are going to read the title of the episode and be like, oh, I'm going to get hit with some hard truths. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. But so often if you want to and everyone knows this in recovery, if you want to be taking that autonomy back, you want to be getting that choice back, it's not with ease. You really have to face what's going on. And I think so much of this topic is very much about, okay, so like, yes, the eating disorder is making us these promises, but we're believing them.
Yes.
So, it's also very much like, yes, the eating disorder made us the promises, but look, we have to look at our role in this as well. Yes. And I think when we have all the information, we know it makes it that much, a bit easier for us to be like, okay, is there another path? Is there another option?
Yeah. I think it's so powerful to face these elements, because a lot of the time, and you've probably heard this too, whether or not it's time that people have put in, or energy they've put in, or things that they've lost to uphold their eating disorder, it's what's referred to as the sunken cost fallacy. It shows up a lot in people who get involved in things like multi-level marketing schemes and who pour a lot of money and time into something they're never going to make money on. In fact, they lose money, where they say, well, I'm too far in it now. Like, I've dedicated too much. And that is a fallacy. Any day that you can spend out of something that's destructive is a day you gain, right? It isn't, you're not going to, just by keeping your head in the sand and staying in denial, you're not suddenly going to be given all the rewards for, just being able to stay determined in something that was never going to give you back what you went into it for.
That's so interesting. Because I think you and I have talked about some of these other things that are not necessarily eating disorder related, and how it is so easy for people to have that allure of something, right? Like in hope of something, like there's this promise at the end of it, whether it's like an eating disorder promise or like, a scam, whatever it is. Because I think it kind of comes back to like human nature a bit, or like not necessarily human nature, but like dominant society, where we just really like idolize speed and like, I want something, I want it now.
So I thought that we'd start with ours, like if we have one each that we can unpack, and then we'll go through the sort of the more common ones that I received on Instagram, and we can sort of go through those and talk about why it's important to acknowledge that they are broken promises and the ways in which like these are used as mechanisms by the eating disorder, right? So one of mine, a big one for me, and I talked about this years ago, I can't believe that I haven't discussed it in so long, was this idea that there was like this perfect version of myself in a bubble down the track, and I just had to like go and release her. And I was doing that by making my body how I thought it should be, making my conduct and my behavior how I thought it should be, all of these sort of external box tickers that I was trying to achieve, because I would get to this perfect, stagnant outcome and person who had it all figured out, who never felt anxiety, who never did anything wrong, who was getting everything in life that she ever wanted. And if I could just do all the things that were being asked of me by my eating disorder, then I would get there. And then like the eating disorder would get, like the bubble didn't have the eating disorder in it, but I had to get deeper into my eating disorder to like release this perfect version of myself. And then I'd get to live this totally perfect life and be this fully formed version of myself. And that was so alluring because life had been so hard and I hated myself so much. And I had increasingly become so lonely and so disconnected that this idea that if I just kept trying to kick through those goalposts perfectly and consistently, like I was gonna get the reward, I was gonna get to the outcome. And it's such a nefarious mechanism of the eating disorder because in order for you to get to an outcome without your eating disorder, you have to get further into your eating disorder.
Mm.
A bird's eye view makes absolutely no sense, but when you're in it, you're like, this is the answer. This is how I'm going to get there. It's one of my
Mm.
favorite things to highlight with clients is like you can't get to a destination that is filled with like self-love and acceptance and happiness and confidence and all these things if you walk a path that is paved with like self-hatred and isolation and all of these things that are on the path is the going to be the makeup of the destination that you
Mm.
get to.
Mm. It's so interesting, right, when you're describing, because obviously we're listening to it and being like, well, like it's like these eating sort of promises are like dogma. Like, why are we not like challenging them? Like, why are we not being able to look at this sort of with like a more like a multidimensional lens, right? Because when you're in the eating disorder, like it's very narrow-minded focus. It is so hard to come out into that bird's eye view look because when you can't, I think so often, so many people who would be listening to this know like, yeah, they've got a lot of eating sort of promises, but how are you ready to come out into the bird's eye view and actually see the impact that it's having on your life? Because it's kind of like, when you do put all your eggs in one basket, there feels like there's urgency because all the
Mhm.
eggs are in one basket, right? It's like,
Mhm.
well, the basket can't possibly break because what's going to happen to the eggs?
Yes, which we talked about before is that whole concept of like your self-worth and your identity can't
Yeah.
fit in one basket.
Yeah.
It's an eating disorder and its promises, or it's a relationship, or I talked a little bit about this with Josie as well in the friendship episode, or it's like just in one
Yeah.
friendship, or it's like just in your career. Because if something happens to that basket, your entire sense of self and identity is going to collapse, which is exactly what
Mm.
the mechanism of this was it was like holding who I wanted to be at like a ransom and being like, in order for you
Mm.
to get all these things you want, these are all the things that you have to do to get there. And not realizing that I was just fortifying myself in that cage and that prison. And that not only was I not going to get to her, but she doesn't exist. There is no perfect, fully formed version of me ever
Mm.
who has it all figured
Mm.
out and is never going to have a bad day or is never going to feel anxiety or is never going to have difficult things come up in career or relationships or friendships or family or experience loss or whatever, that it can't keep me safe from
Mm.
any of those things and that version of myself. And I remember going into recovery and even believing in a sense that like recovery was going to do that for me. I was going to
Mm.
and I was going to become, this perfect version of myself. This was right at the start. And I remember my mum saying to me, like, that's never going to happen. Like I'm
Mm.
at that point, like late 50s, and I don't have everything figured out. And I still have anxiety about certain things, and there's still uncertainty and
Mm.
know how every day is going to go or what's around the corner or how I'm necessarily going to cope with it. It's not about trying to get to this fixed version of yourself. It's about working on coping with the fact that you're never going to get to that fixed version, that you're going to have to
Mm.
put yourself through every stage and phase of life, perfect or imperfect.
Yeah. And I think what you're describing there comes back to so much of what the root of this work of recovery just generally is
Mm.
that, metaphorically, but also probably like literally, you need to take a seat and like put down the war and stop running away from everything that isn't yourself in hope of like being able to create this ideal life or whatever it may be. Because ultimately, so many of the things that we seek, and this was very much something that came up for me as well when I was thinking about all the different broken promises, was that like everything that I was seeking, I actually did have the capacity to create and evolve that in my own life. But the
Mhm.
eating sort of pushed me away from believing that I had any capacity to find a sense of self-worth, to find a sense of belonging, to find a sense of self-love, that it had to be this external element. Like, for me, it was very much the eating disorder. But like we're saying as well, it can be like putting all your eggs in the basket of like a job or a role or a relationship or whatever it is, or a community or whatever it might be. But ultimately, there's never going to be the one thing that can save you. Nothing can and no one can and should do that. Ultimately, it has to be you.
Absolutely. And it's also the idea that regardless of whether you feel like your eating disorder is going to give it to you or recovery is going to give it to
Mm.
you, that, like, you don't already have all the things that you need within
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Like, the amount of people who I speak to who are like, but Mia, in this recovery work, like, if you take my eating disorder away, which we can't do, by the way, that doesn't work. We wouldn't be doing this job if, like, that's how it worked, because it doesn't. That's just traumatizing treatment approach anyway. And no one can really do that. But they're like, if this all gets taken away, like, what's going to be left? And that's part of our job, is to show people the
Mm.
pieces on the board that they already have. And then we just go and add to it and grow on that and realize
Yeah.
that there isn't then like this perfect puzzle that gets put together and then you're done.
Mm.
That it's about that puzzle and that picture and that sense of you ever expanding and growing in ways that you can't even anticipate at the moment. But it's a very binary way of thinking that we go into with recovery and eating disorder sometimes, which is like, I either have the eating disorder or I'm nothing. I'm either nothing or I'm recovered. And it's
Mm.
like all the complexity and all the creativity and all of the curiosity that's like in the in-between spaces.
Mm.
And that's the most interesting part. The idea that there was a younger version of me who was like, oh, I hope there's like a 36-year-old version of me who's got it all figured out and like is perfect and has like reached the end of the road of like her self-actualization, is like, imagine all the amazing stuff that I've been able to do, like that we are now doing together within this business, that I've been able to do in my personal life, the places I've been, the directions that I've been able to move into. If I had been like, well, I've reached this fixed, stagnant outcome of who I am and I'm done now.
That's
Like,
it. Hands off.
that's more terrifying to me now than it would have been to my 25-year-old self, being like, you mean I have to keep evolving and growing and being compassionate and flexible to myself forever? Like, this is by far the better deal.
Absolutely. I think so when I was thinking about this topic, it became really clear very quickly that there were sort of these different categories of eating disorder promises, but so many of them overlapped with a few themes, which I think when I reflect on where I was at in my life at this time, it makes a lot of sense. I was very much sort of in a time of confusion and change and just feeling like I was in a lot of lack. And then, of course, like eating disorder swoops on in with all these hopes of like happiness and self-worth and importance. So I feel like this is pretty similar in a lot of ways to sort of what you were saying as well, and all of these promises for me also very much had like a when, right? It's like, I will be happy when I have this new life. I will feel worthy when I have this new body. I will feel important when I look this new way. And all these things were very much like promised to me on this silver platter, but only once I achieved that goal point, right? But I think as it was simultaneously promising me all these things, it was also colluding me to believe that every single trouble I had in my life was because of my weight.
Yeah.
Everything, right? And I wasn't happy because of my weight. I didn't feel worthy. This is what the eating was telling me. I didn't feel worthy to be chosen or worthy to even like go after the life that I really wanted for myself because of my weight. Like I didn't feel like important enough that I could like connect with my life also because of my weight. So it promised that I could, if I did this thing, my entire world would change, right? And look, it changed, but it wasn't for the better. I guess
Well,
that
look,
was
I mean,
true.
it did deliver. It changed.
Like it did. It was just like the wrong delivery. But these promises, I think when I was reflecting about it on it, they're so grown out of this just desperation for wanting a different life. And for me, it was like very much like also different body and also just sometimes like a different brain, I think. I was like clinging onto something in hope that it would give me this like beautiful, colorful, joyous life, but it actually sucked all the color out of the life that I already had. My eating disorder absolutely convinced me that I could use my body to overcome every other insecurity that I had in my life.
Yeah.
But I was wrong. I was wrong. Being thinner than how I was perceiving myself, like ultimately, yeah, like it did what that does. Like it momentarily helped me feel lighter and probably like more attractive on a daily basis by society standards. But that feeling was so fleeting and it was never going to be enough. And I actually felt so much worse than when I jumped into this experience at the beginning, because what the eating disorder doesn't do is heal any of the underlying suffering and repressed pain. And it's never going to, I think finding and accepting the evidence that I had bought into the scam was horrible, because like I was saying before, I had put all my eggs, all my hope, all my faith in this thing that wasn't going to be the answer. And I think that's also can be where like so many people in recovery, there's like so much fear comes up when they start to, a lot of these things come into clarity and they're like, well, oh fuck, like that was false hope. That was broken promises. And that can feel really, really difficult because
Yeah.
it does feel like, okay, all the eggs have just fallen on the ground. So this is also why so much of recovery, like you were saying, like this is a slow process. Like we're taking one egg and we're putting it over here. We're taking
Yeah.
another egg and we're putting it over here because it can feel really overwhelming. And I even think that fear can almost keep people stuck in the eating disorder because they're like, I really have no other option. Like all the eggs are here. I really need to stay on this path.
Mhm.
But, you know, the evidence for me was very much that it didn't make me happier. It made me scared. And it didn't give me a sense of self-worth, which is what I wanted because I didn't even have a sense of self. So there was no worth to be found there.
Yeah, absolutely. That really reminds me of one that was really, really common in like the responses, which
Mm.
was, I will be more confident overall, which is one of my favorite ones
Across
to,
the board.
yeah,
Yeah.
like confident in my appearance, confident in my personality, confident in like social situations. And it's one of my favorite ones to unpack because, as you know, the way that I like to start working with clients is like we do history intake, and in the second session, we do an activity from the keys called What My Eating Disorder Does For Me. And this episode is kind of like an extrapolated version of that,
Mm.
right? Which is let's genuinely like hand the microphone over to eating disorder and let it tell us like what
Yeah.
does it feel it's doing for us. And we're not tricking it. Like there's no trick questions. We're never with clients being like, oh, gotcha. It's if there is a gotcha, it's between them and them. It's not us, right? It's like the healthy part of them going, oh, hang on a minute. I don't think I'm actually buying
Mm.
eating disorder.
Mm.
And this is a big one, which people will say to me, look, it makes me more confident, or it made me more confident. And when we get into it, the easiest way I can clarify that for people is to ask them, like, how would they describe a confident person? Someone who is self-assured, somebody who carries themselves in a way that is clearly reflective of like their sense of self-worth, right? That they don't just go with the crowd, they can back themselves, that they
Mm.
aren't easily swayed, or if somebody doesn't like them, then it's not like the end of the world for them, right? And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, so you can identify that in somebody else, and like you can probably picture someone who, you know, they have in mind. And then I'll ask them, now, what if you found out that that person had an eating disorder? Would you still classify them as confident? And they're like,
Mm.
why not? Well, because the things they have to do to themselves in order to have the veneer of confidence, to appear to be
Mm.
confident, is a contradiction.
Mm.
Someone who is confident isn't doing to themselves what is required to continue to maintain an eating disorder, which is a sense of total lack of self-worth or
Yeah.
self-loathing, right?
Yeah.
Because if you think about, could you do the physical things that you do in your eating disorder, could you do that to somebody else? Probably not.
Mm.
That
Mm.
the answer is 100% no from everybody I've ever asked that question of. What if you didn't know them? What if you really disliked them? The answer is still no. So how much do we have to have a lack of self worth or a sense of self that is in any way positive in order to continue to maintain these things, which are,
Mm.
you could almost describe some of these behaviors as like torturous, you know, what the eating disorder can get us to do to ourselves to support itself. So this concept that like it's making you confident, it might be giving you the appearance of confidence. I know that I felt like I was maybe more deserving of walking into a room with my head held high if I was meeting these markers of what an eating disorder thought I should do to earn that. But did I feel any of it? Absolutely not. If somebody gave me a compliment, as you're saying, the feeling of that compliment would be so fleeting. It would be like I was Teflon, and the
Mm.
compliment would come in and it would hit the surface of who I am, and then it would bounce straight off. And I would need more and more and more and more and more of it because I had none of that internally myself,
Mm.
and I had nowhere to leave.
Mm.
Compliment didn't
Mm.
have where to take up residence, right? Because what I was
Yeah.
telling myself all the time was so negative and so hideous and so self-loathing that the compliment would be like, I don't have anywhere to attach to. But I
Yeah.
did that so desperately. That is
Mm.
not confidence. It's the
Totally.
opposite of confidence.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
the language it uses is so deceptive that it's claiming to be doing this for you, and a little bit of investigating and you're like, hang on a minute,
Yeah.
is there any truth to what it claims every day to be fulfilling the role of, you know.
Totally. I think this confidence promise is really interesting because what this promise fails to recognize, just to piggyback off what you were saying, is like this absolute like colossal amount of factors that derail the confidence that the eating disorder is promising you because of the eating disorder.
Yeah.
Right? Like the more entrenched someone becomes in an eating disorder, like expect more comparison, right?
Mm,
Eating disorders foster a culture of comparison by measuring their worth against unrealistic standards.
yeah.
This constant comparison, it is going to undermine self-confidence because when there is like unobtainable ideals, it's pretty easy to fall short of those expectations, right? Because I think like if you're so focused on like confidence, right? And then getting that confidence from a sense of like, I am better than, or I am comparing myself to this person, therefore this is giving me a sense of worth. Instead of celebrating unique qualities and strengths, like you're going to be really fixated on your flaws and shortcomings, like you're saying. So it's like the compliments aren't even going to stick, which is then going to lead to perpetual cycles of self-criticism and just dissatisfaction, which it ain't feeling super confident to me.
No. And confidence now to me, and it's so interesting when you're like heading through the recovery process and you stumble across these feelings that your
Yeah.
eating disorder told you were having before. And then you
Mm.
get the real version of it and you're like, oh my God, it is the
Yeah.
definition of like what I ordered on Amazon versus what I got. Like those girls who are
Yeah.
like ordered like these beautiful
I
ball
love these
gowns and they
videos.
look absolutely like couture and just amazing. And then like a one piece of tulle with a bit of rope and like one diamante stuck to it shows up. And you're like, one of these things is not like the other. And when you
Mm.
find, it's like when people stumble across body neutrality for the first time and they're like, oh my God, I get it. Like I understand where I've been trying to get to. And it was in the total opposite direction of where I've been walking towards. And confidence was definitely one of them, which is that it is innate. It isn't, as we always say, like from the external in. It's an inside job.
Mm.
And then that then
Mm.
has this effect of how it then impacts, yes, your external world and how you might connect to people and to your goals and to those sorts of things differently. But it's not earned outwardly. It's not, oh, I have that. And so now I'm confident. It's something that you have to build within. And then, yes, those things outside might affirm that confidence and might steer you in the direction of like, yeah, that's building my confidence, but it's not something that's going to be, oh, I've got that body now, I've got that job now, I've got that title now, I've got that person now, I've got that friendship group
Mm.
now. And so therefore, like suddenly magically there's this core of confidence inside of me.
Exactly, right? I think also not to even also just to mention like some of the eating disorder, like the physical and emotional toll that can have on someone, and then that toll is then going to make it really difficult to actually like fully engage in life and pursue meaningful relationships where you can even be confident. And also just generally like the eating disorder creates such an experience of like impaired social functioning, right? And that comes from like isolation and social withdrawal, which are also going to increase these feelings of loneliness or alienation, which are going to ultimately like erode confidence,
Yes.
right? Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the greatest irony of eating disorders is like the
Mm.
thing that it's promising is the thing it has to withhold from you.
Totally. I feel like confidence and control, the most irony ever.
Yeah.
Listen to these two factors.
So another one that was really common that came through was I will have friends and be loved once I look perfect, which feels
Mm.
a bit like the Mia in a bubble down the track one for me, because that was a big one, was like, even though I had spent so much time being isolated with my eating disorder, when I imagined this future version of myself, like she was surrounded by people and she had so much access to like friendship and love and connection and community. Um, because she would finally be deserving of that and finally have earned that. But the degradation of myself and the creeping, crawling sort of isolation of myself, which was like, if I just stay in this cave and I improve on all these things and then I come out into the world, it's like everyone's going to see all this work that I've done on myself and they're going to
Mm.
want to be, in my orbit, which
Mm.
was so false because I was chopping the strings of everyone who was attached to me. And by the time I went to recovery, like I was completely alone, no job, no friends, not speaking to my family,
Yeah.
completely isolated in a cave.
Yeah, when I read this one, I will have friends and be loved once I looked perfect. It just made me just go, oh,
Mhm.
exhale, I get you, sis. This was such a like true experience that I had when I was unwell. But I think this promise, like it is just preying on insecurity
Yeah.
and really perpetuating these harmful beliefs that approval and acceptance from others can only be obtained, right?
Mhm.
When you achieve a certain standard of like looking like perfect, whatever that even means. But in reality, authentic relationships are built on mutual trust and respect and connection, which are all qualities that absolutely transcend any physical attributes, right? But by believing this false promise of like love and friendship based solely on appearance, you really risk sacrificing your true self in pursuit of that unobtainable ideal. And I feel like that is probably an experience that most people who've had an eating disorder or struggle with food have probably would be like, yeah, that is absolutely me. I also think just basing self-worth and also the quality of relationships on external factors such as weight and appearance, it just leads to such cycles of inadequacy and also just so much self-doubt.
Yeah.
I also think when like if this is the focus, like I will have friends and be loved once I look perfect, it's also gonna be a breeding ground for like toxic relationships that are built on
Totally.
shallow foundations, right? Where one's worth is like constantly tied to like having to meet these unrealistic beauty standards. Whereas like true friendship and love thrive in environments where individuals feel accepted and respected and just like they can show up as themselves despite their outward appearance. It's like love is blind. You know, I think it's such a if you're experiencing this, it's such a good question to ask yourself. Like, are you only friends with people because of their appearance? You know, I think, you know, from personal experience, like I don't want friends who are perfect. Like, I want real friends. If I had a perfect friend, I'd probably call bullshit on it and be like, this isn't real and it's annoying. Like, I want authentic and like raw, genuine friendships because perfect, it's such a facade. Like, none of us are perfect. It doesn't matter. And so I feel like this is coming to like a common theme of this conversation. Like, it doesn't matter how much healing you do, there's still going to be some times where you break down
Oh
all
yeah.
over again. And
Yeah.
you want to have the people around you that can help pick you back up because they know that who you are is the sum of all your mess and all your beauty.
Mm. And I also want to hold a lot of space for a lot of where societally we learn this stuff when,
Yeah.
because this is where a lot of the criticism or the stigma of eating disorders really irritates me, where people will say, well, people do talk about the fact that like they do want like the perfect body. And I'm like,
Mm.
yes,
Yeah.
look deeper. Why do they believe that that is going to be their access point to all these things that as human beings we naturally want? And this is one of them, right? If I can look perfect, I will have access to friendship. What is friendship? It is connection, it is belonging, it is acceptance. This is
Yes.
not just, I want to look quote unquote good or perfect purely for the sake of like the surface quote unquote vain reasons, which as we know, I think it's like 1 in 5 Australians or something think that eating disorders are a choice and that, you know, you can just get over it and it's just about vanity and all that sort of stuff. We're working on it. It's getting better. People fail to go to the next level of what that represents to people. And it's so
Yeah.
understandable that people equate body to access to all of these very human things we want because it is shoved down our throats constantly from everywhere. People bang on about social media and how this impacts body image and eating disorders. And it is absolutely true. There is a major impact there. And this is it, that we used to understand that, yes, there was celebrities who had usually a body ideal that they were upholding, and they had access to wealth and success, and they were venerated and they were loved, and they were all these things that, you know, in a very shallow way we connect. And by shallow, I mean surface
Mm.
level, right? Where we don't think any more deeply than that, than what we see. And now we're seeing it amongst our peers, and we're seeing it amongst people who are sort of that influencer status where it's like, well, they're not a celebrity, they're sort of a step closer to me. And so
Mm.
if that's how they access all those things that I want, then I should access those things in the same way. And very often they've all got the same bloody body type, which is usually white and thin. And they are demonstrating not only that this is their body, but part of the message is also, and because I have this body, I've got this perfect relationship and this perfect family and this perfect group of friends. And, you know, I also have access to, um, sort of financial security and safety and all of these very, very not even covert. When you know it's there, it's overt and in your face. It's very, very obvious, but it's monetizing a body type. And then a lot of these people, especially in the influencer space, will also then coincidentally be selling you programs or products or supplements or something that has some connection back to the body and appearance. So I want to touch on that because I think that then people can carry a lot of shame. Go, well, yeah, how I look is important to me, or wanting this perfect appearance is important to me. And I'm being told that it's shallow and it's superficial and it's vain. One, you didn't come up with it on your own. This is a societal message, which is hugely profitable and is tied to things much deeper than just appearance.
Absolutely.
And also, it's you wanting access to things that are much more than just a body. I remember getting a comment on a video from years ago where someone said to me, but Mia, I wish you'd stop saying that, you know, wanting to be thin is about more than wanting to be thin. I do just want to be thin. And I was like, yes, but why? Why? What is the end goal here? Once you've got that, then what do you get, right? So I think it's important to address that it doesn't just stop at I've got the perfect body and then I've got a group of friends, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And like I'm social and I get to go out. Like we know that it's about something a lot deeper than that.
Totally. It's about like meeting our basic human needs and feeling like
Yeah.
this is the way in which we can do that. For so many people, beauty has been a survival mechanism. And I think like, you know, this promise, like so many of them, particularly it is operating as protection also, like in another sense, sort of like as if protecting you from going out there and potentially putting yourself in a vulnerable position where you have to make friends and then potentially could get rejected or feel lonely or feel unseen or misunderstood, right? Which are all just such raw but normal and necessary human experiences that we all have to have from time to time. So I think, you know, this promise, you know, I will have friends and be loved once I looked perfect. It's almost like trying to shelter you from the things that would happen if you like weren't perfect and you tried to make friends. It's like maybe you would be rejected, maybe these other things would happen, but the reality is if you're showing up like eating disorder and we're putting on this facade, which is probably, you know, seeping a lot of like insecurity and you're feeling really inauthentic, it's like these things are probably going to happen anyway. Ultimately, like we're all going to feel lonely and rejected at times, and the eating sort of can't protect you from these things. But it's also, you know, it's those social experiences of adversity that actually really help us grow and gain resilience and figure out, okay, so maybe who do I want to be friends with? What do I want my world to look like? Who do I want to spend, who do I want to surround myself with?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember it always it was so odd because on one hand, it was a simple explanation for me, and it was also a painful one where if I could oversimplify, if someone was mean to me or rude to me or rejected me or whatever it was so simple for me to tell myself it's because of your body. And that would always be my first go-to. It's because of my body. Even when I was kicking the goals that eating disorder wanted me to kick body-wise, right? Because as we know, it's never enough. But it would then, something would happen, like I'd have an interaction with someone, even a perceived one. I mean, how much of it was actually real? Like it would be a look on someone's face and I could make a whole story out of what that meant and what that person was thinking and what was wrong with me. But it was such a simple answer to say it's because of my body. I didn't have to go deeper and look at anything more complicated than that. But it was also painful because I could never win, because the goalposts always moved, because people are complicated. People will say shitty things or look at you in a shitty way, or even the people who are 99.9% of the time just really fantastic at being supportive and affirming, they'll have a bad day, right? And so every time something like that would happen, I would have to tell myself, well, it's because of your body. And so then we'd kick off another round of me being self-destructive and taking it out on myself and trying to avoid those kinds of interactions, which again is that zoom out, bird's eye view effect of that is its mechanism to keep you stuck. It is never going to be the solution, because if it keeps telling you that lie and you keep being in the world interacting with people, it's going to uphold itself always, because it'll always be able to say to you, well, it's because of your body. And it was like a slingshot. Something would happen and my brain would go, they wouldn't have treated you like that if your body wasn't XYZ. Immediately it would say that. And I would then find myself like I said, back into that cycle, because it was the comfort of it being that simple and the immense pain of, therefore, this is never going to end.
I just resonate with so much about what you're saying, because it's so true. It's like the eating disorder and the body being like the problem. It does feel like it's a bit of a scapegoat, but then maybe what's the harder fact of being like, okay, well, it's not the body. It's just that like we're humans and sometimes people don't like us, and that's okay.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that we're inherently flawed. It doesn't mean that something's wrong with us. It
Yeah.
just means like, okay, so this person or this moment or this experience like maybe wasn't meant for us. And
Yeah.
that's it. Or it could be as simple as like someone's having a bad day and they've thrown a comment and we've taken it as super, super personal. And I think so much of this work in just healing generally and self-development is don't make assumptions, don't take it personally.
Yeah. And also boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And communicating to say to somebody like, oh, I think like, is everything okay? And, just because I just want to check in, your tone was a bit, and
Yeah.
instead we jump to it's me. And then even just sort of goes the next layer, which is like, it's your body, right? It's what you look like, or it's this, or it's that.
Yeah.
And it's why I love the approach of the work that we do, which is like the holistic thing, which is not just about food, not just about body. It's also about boundaries. Like I'm always working on helping people learn more effective communication with the people around them, expressing their boundaries around like what's helpful and what's not helpful. Like I work on clients with, for a period of time in recovery, asking their nearest and dearest, please don't comment on my food or my body unless you see something really concerning happening. And then please bring it up with like one of my professionals. And they're like, but that's really uncomfortable. And I'm like, yes, but you telling yourself that every interaction that isn't positive is an indictment on who you are at your core as a person is also really uncomfortable. So it's this multi-layered way of taking that immediate, like I said, simplified version of like how the world works. Well, someone's mean to me, or someone doesn't like me, or someone has a bad reaction to me. And so I'll change my body to fix it, which is so the version of like your kitchen tap is leaking, so you paint your bedroom, right? Like it's not actually dealing with the original issue. It's not dealing with maybe that interaction with that person, or more deeply, like how you talk to yourself about what you deserve and how you're treated, and goes like, okay, well, I'll just avoid that and go and fiddle with like numbers and, sizes and food and all that kind of stuff. But realizing like that simplification is actually very, very complicated and long-term incredibly painful, because there's no way that those relationships are not going to be affected by that, right? If you're not help seeking, if you're not setting boundaries, your interaction with other people is going to be hindered by that. You're not, like you say, you're not going to have authentic connections. You're not going to be showing up to those relationships as your true self. And so you're not creating a space where somebody else can do that either. We're setting examples for each other in our relationships all the time, right? Like with Josie and I, as soon as we started, like, I don't remember which one of us it was, but one of us was, I think it was Jo. She was like, I'm trying to reach out more in real time. I'm trying to like help seek and process in real time. And I didn't say to her, oh, cool, thank you for doing that. That gives me permission to do it too. But I started doing it as well, because I was like, she's set this example of what our friendship and relationship can be. I'm going to show up in the same way. And it's totally changed our dynamic and how we cope and how we navigate the world. So you setting boundaries and help seeking in a more effective way is also a favor to that person you're in relationship to, because you're showing them that it's safe for them to do that as well. Whereas if we're always just holding back and like taking it out on ourselves and not expressing our needs and not expressing our boundaries, we're kind of showing other people that they don't have permission to do that either.
Totally. And then also enabling that. Like you want, particularly, I think, so many people would experience as you move through recovery and you really get clear on these are the kind of people I want in my life. These are the kind of relationships I want to have. It becomes like pretty clear when you've enabled someone to treat you badly. And it's pretty hard. Like it's absolutely possible, but it is actually really difficult. Like when there weren't boundaries, then you have to put the boundaries in and you have to be like, hey, I was enabling this behavior. I was allowing people to cross my boundaries, or I wasn't speaking my truth because I was a bit stuck in people pleasing or whatever it may be. That's difficult to do, but it's also such a necessary and part of healing that actually can't be skipped.
Absolutely. Because it's unsustainable when people are like, oh, that's really uncomfortable because I'm going to have to. And it's like, trust me, a relationship without boundaries and without honest communication is not going to last anyway. And that's going to be really uncomfortable, whether or not it's a
Exactly.
quiet parting of the ways, or it's an abrupt ending, or it's a series of like conflicts or whatever it is.
Mm.
It's as we say, like a lot of this is just like, which kind of uncomfortable do you want to be? The one that
Exactly.
actually keeps the things in your life that are valuable to you, or the one that is unsustainable and destructive and just blows everything up eventually?
Totally, because then this kind of comes to another one of the core broken promises, which is very much that using an eating disorder, I can like manage my emotions, or
Yeah.
like I don't have to feel my emotions, or whatever it is. And like we're sort of saying here, it's like the world is uncomfortable. Both options are uncomfortable. So you really have to pick your pain. I
Mhm.
think this was very much a theme that came up for me a lot when I was thinking about my own experience. I think it's just so common for the eating disorder. It does. It gives you this false sense of comfort and safety. But ultimately it can't actually shield you from, or can't really help you actually manage those feelings in the long run. Um, I think it can seem really appealing for someone who's struggling to manage uncomfortable feelings to use an eating disorder as a tool to alleviate that suffering. But like for so many reasons, it can't follow through with the promise. And what is just a deeply sharp truth is the realization that the temporary relief provided by these behaviors only ultimately is going to serve to deepen the emotional pain in the long run. It's temporary, but it is going to perpetuate a really vicious cycle, because I think the behaviors actually reinforce the negative thought patterns and then deepen the psychological stress. What I think we need to talk about, which I don't feel like is like talked about enough, is the emotional void that follows attempting to use disordered behaviors as a coping mechanism, because that void is dark and deep and lonely. And I think it's in that void that you're left with the original pain that we didn't address, and now
Yeah.
the additional pain of engaging in behaviors that on some level are not in alignment or are not actually serving you.
Yeah, completely. It's the very selective memory of an eating disorder, which is why I love to do that broadening of the lens and making people
Mm,
full scope of what it's doing. It's kind of like with the language thing. It's why I focus so much on language and listening to what it's claiming to do versus what the evidence shows us. It's the same as like, what is it claiming to do in these short instances, and then it's bookending it and saying, I'm just responsible for this. Just, that 30 minutes
mm,
where you're avoidant, you didn't feel anything, that's my job. It's like, yeah, but what about the shame and guilt and
yes.
regret and fear of like this continuing? Because I remember after using behaviors, the panic that I would feel of like, how the fuck did I end up here again? When is
Yeah.
it going to end? I promised myself last time it would never happen again, and here I am, and this is going to be me for the rest of my life, and I can't. And then you have this full clarity, right? And it just wants to take credit for this bit and not the chaos that comes before, and then the immense, as you say, void, that dark black hole
Mm,
of just fear, panic, regret, guilt, shame, and then the whole process starts again, right? And I
mm,
think it's also a powerful one to refute, because when people say to me, well, Mia, this helps me with anxiety, that is clinically, physiologically impossible. Your
mm,
brain requires 20% of what you eat every day to fuel itself. And that is if you are eating enough. And when we say enough, we mean not just by amount, but by variety and by regularity and by all the ways that food can have a role in your life, whether it's socially or it's
mm,
comfort or it's nourishment or whatever, right? You need to be eating enough across all those categories for your brain to operate properly. A brain that is not fueled properly is in distress, it is anxious. So, this is one of my favorite ones because there is just
mm.
universal human body level, like we've all got it, we've all got the same operating system. And if you didn't, if you were that special and different, you would be in a lab right now, they would be running experiments on you. There is no way that you are experiencing optimal anxiety management if you have a relationship with food that is dictated by an eating disorder, and that exists across the entire diagnostic spectrum,
Mm,
across the disordered eating spectrum. It is an impossible position from the eating disorder that it is effectively, in that broadened lens sense, and in a physiological and psychological emotional sense, that it is just a non-starter. It is
mm,
impossible.
mm. And I also feel like that like hard evidence there could actually feel so liberating to some people being like, oh, I actually maybe don't have to feel this way all the time. Because I can very much say, I actually don't think I was a very anxious person until I had an eating disorder.
Me too.
Like, I actually wasn't. Like, I don't even think I knew what anxiety was. And I was like, hey,
Yep.
Nicole, I live and breathe this thing. It's so interesting though. And it kind of almost, I think it can, that evidence as well can be just this little pocket of motivation for people to be like, oh, okay, maybe it actually, there's something else that's going to happen psychologically when I actually am nourishing my body. It's not just people feel like, but the more I eat, then I'm going to have more stress. I'm going to be more anxious about the food that I've eaten. They're rather being like, no, 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 that's actually going to support you on so many different levels. Because at least then you've kind of got this safeguard of, oh, but like my body, like physiologically, cognitively, I'm going to have the capacity to function at the spot that I need to then be able to manage this emotional experience, as opposed from like when you're trying to manage anxiety and your body is undernourished,
Mm.
right? It is honestly, it's not impossible, but it is 10 times, 100 times harder to do than if you're actually in a well-fueled body.
It's building a house on a cracked
It
foundation.
is.
Like
Yeah.
it, you live there for like a week and then like the whole thing is sinking into the ground, right? So it's like you've got to work on that foundation first. But I think, and this one especially, the reason I think that it's so important to help people explore this stuff is not just to go, oh, here's all the ways that your eating disorder has failed you, but it's why we listen to the eating disorder in the work that we do with people, because it's got all the clues about what we need that healthy part of us to
Mm,
pick up the mantle and run with, which is all these areas. So I don't want anyone going and investigating and interrogating this stuff with the idea that at the end of it it's just like, oh great, so I have nothing to hold on to. And no, these are all clues. These are all
mm,
clues of what your healthy self will have the capacity to do for you.
yeah.
As we say with that, egg redistribution, it's kind of like this as well, where it's like we've got to incrementally take the jobs that eating disorders trying to do and hand them over to healthy self. And this is a great starting point, is to listen to what it is trying to do. And it is, this is why we don't demonize eating disorder self. It is
Mm,
good faith trying to take care of you and help you. It is ill-equipped. It is a toddler trying to drive you down a highway. Very sweet intentions, terrible in execution. So
mm,
we want to listen to it for why it wants to do that and what function it's trying to serve. But all of this is just to illustrate and demonstrate it's a unsustainable and very, very precarious way to cope and to operate your
mm,
life. And it might
mm.
be time to start integrating some of this stuff back into healthy self.
Yeah, and I think, the reality is like there's no shortcuts in life. There's no easy buttons, and recovery is definitely not an easy button, but everyone has to do the work in life, whether it's recovery or not. Everyone has to learn to meet themselves in the hard moments and learn to breathe through it all without getting lost in the storm. And recovery is the space to practice that. I also think this promise is particularly dangerous, I think, because the more that you are attempting to use behaviors and the eating disorder to manage your emotions, you're pushing yourself away from the belief that you actually can cope with your emotions, because you can. Like, everyone can learn to cope with their own emotions, but you're just out of practice. Like, it is a skill. But first of all, we need to remove the way in which you're attempting to cope with them, right? Which is really not coping with them. It's suppressing them or pushing them away or avoiding them, and be like, okay, well, we have to meet yourself with those emotions. So this is so much of the, I think this is so much of the work that we do, of really supporting to people to be like, okay, well, so if we're to feel these emotions, what's actually going to happen here? How can we work on this distress tolerance? What does that actually look like in these moments? Can we label these emotions? Can we be with them? Can we invite them to tea? Because I think the more that you're able to witness them and experience them in an everyday sense, it doesn't have to be like the biggest eating sort of urge you've ever felt in your life, but rather just feeling these emotions day to day in these small instances that where you can build trust of being like, okay, cool, I felt anxious, then I was able, like 2 hours later, I was feeling okay, or like I felt a bit dysregulated here, or I was feeling a little bit lonely, but in the afternoon, I actually really found joy in something, whatever it is. There's so many ways to practice working on that trust with yourself, that I can be with these emotions. Because ultimately, like, you're going to feel many emotions every single day for the rest of your life. So learning how to show up for yourself and be able to support yourself through all of them. Like, this is incredibly core work of, I think, being a human.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's such a opportunity in so many ways.
Yeah.
Like we always say, like, we're not just teaching people recovery skills, we're teaching them life skills.
Yeah.
And this is a huge one. Well, so many ones that we've listed. And like I said, there are so many more. I have saved all of them because I think this is definitely one that we're going to revisit, because it's such a great opportunity to help people do a very, very, like you said, like hard truth kind of perspective
Mhm.
shift. And that's where I think that a lot of people either get propelled forward through maybe the next thing they need to do. But I think it's also a really good entry point for people, as you say, to look at the reality and maybe just start that awareness building piece of like observing,
Mm.
here's the promise, here's the evidence, there's a disconnect. Maybe this is not working the way that I'd like to believe it is. So I will hold on to the other responses and we'll be revisiting this one in the future. But thank you so much for being with us for another episode. We will see you guys in a couple of weeks. And thank you for spending another morning with me, Hol.
Anytime.